How are we doing, everybody, and welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we're talking about the release. Now, to talk about the release, I'd probably, if you've watched the videos on the pre-impact stuff and the impact position and how things like your forearms and hands should work, would probably help you interpret this information more, but I'm going to skim over it very quickly. What I've got today is I've got an angle down representing my kind of plane line, if you like, and I've also got a target line down. What I've basically said, the importance in the golf swing is that the club face needs to point square at the point of impact. To give yourself the best chance of doing that, the club needs to work on an arc. And as you can see, if you were to draw an extension at the end of the shaft, it would keep pointing down towards the target line up to impact and then as it goes through. That basically means that would help you keep the club working on the correct sort of arc, which gives you the best chance of getting the club face square. What I've also talked about again more recently on the channel is that what you don't want to do is that when you're going into this kind of, hitting duration, so as you're going into this post-impact position, you don't really want the club head overtaking the hands, because, it basically just makes the club face very vulnerable of being inconsistent. Inconsistent potentially in the strike, okay, but also inconsistent in your ability to keep the club face stable. Now, what I will do in the future is I'll talk about the general ball flight laws, and if you were to strike down, which way would you do it, be pointing, and go into that into more detail. But for the general premise of today, what I'm trying to suggest is that the club should work on an arc, and we don't really want too much movement of the club face coming in towards post-impact. Now, even if there was movement, right, which means that you might go into like a flip release, or if you went into like a rolling release, or if you went into like an ulnar deviation movement, which is this way, you can still get the club face square at the point of impact with all of these different types of releases. But the problem is it's not about one shot in golf, it's about getting as much consistency as you possibly can throughout 18 holes, if not more. And my concern is that there's so much movement going on in the lower part of our hands and arms that the chance of you consistently timing that, you'd have to be incredibly coordinated to do it, which is why I'm kind of like going to encourage you to kind of take as much motion out of the hands and arms coming in towards the post impact as you possibly can, which we'll come on to now. So the point is, you've got a couple of options when it comes to the release. The first option is that, as you'll see, my left forearm is going to rotate in this manner, which is a supination movement, and that this movement here would potentially encourage my left arm to bend, and therefore my left shoulder to go into external rotation. Now, this is an option, whereas you're coming in towards the hit, club face is nice and square, left forearm starts to rotate round, left shoulder pulls back up, and in theory you can still keep the club on plane. And it's an option, but my concern is, again, that what we're trying to do is you're trying to keep the club face as stable as you possibly can, which is why normally I'd be an advocate now of trying to introduce what's known as a drive hold. So on this channel, I normally give you plenty of options, right? Recently did a video on the natural golf swing where I talked about different variances in the backswing, but a couple of things in the golf swing which I think are really important is, one, the transition of the lower body, so not early extending basically, and also the release. I would try and advocate that you encourage you to the best of your ability to create a drive hold. A drive hold basically means that if I kind of demonstrate from face on what I was just talking about in terms of the rotation of this sort of manner and this sort of movement here, what that does is that I still feel like there's quite a lot of club face movement, and you could be very vulnerable of getting it wrong. If you're going to start moving very much this way, it could easily encourage a roll, it can easily encourage a bit of a flip. So a drive hold, as you'll see now, if you look at the relationship between the shaft and my left arm, it's basically straight. So you can see the way my left arm would work maybe a little bit further away from my body, and you can see the way the club face just stays nice and square. And if I was to swing from this sort of manner again, you can see the way that left arm shaft absolutely straight, club face stays incredibly stable. And what you could also see is that if you operate this sort of technique as we come in towards the hitting area, the way that because of this relationship, the club head is never going to overtake the hands and encourage very much a flipping mechanism in your game. So the drive hold is a really important thing. Now the question is, how do you do a drive hold? Well, this is why I talk a lot about rotation in the game. So I spend a lot of my time trying to help people understand how the hips should move, how you should be rotating your upper body. Because basically, the only way you're going to be able to demonstrate a drive hold position is that in its simplicity, it's just a continuation of rotation. So you can see the way everything's just working as a unit as I keep swinging through. So my chest, everything's moving around, shoulders are moving in space to the side of me, hips are continuing to turn, which means I can hold on to this position. So there's nothing really too much going on. Now, some pros will see, like Jordan Spieth, will hold on to this angle, you know, for ages, right? And then eventually start to release the club. Other golfers will see they'll hold on to a drive hold position and then they'll go into releasing the club. Now, what does that mean? Well, my first demonstration, what I spoke about when the left forearm started to rotate, is an option that you can do just post-impact, right? My concern is, and this is what I see a lot of pros talk about, is they talk about the release, trying to roll your right hand over your left and trying to get into this position. And that goes back to my first option when it comes to the release. My concern with this is that you're making the club face really vulnerable. And I think you're encouraging yourself also to get a little bit flippy. And I think for most of our golfers, it becomes very hard to time it. So that's why I would normally advocate that you're trying to keep this left arm relationship much more solid and keep the club face more solid equally as well. But inevitably what would happen is that, as we see with different examples of pros, they would be holding the club nice and square coming in towards the post-impact position. As they keep swinging through, they might get to kind of roughly sort of like a pre-horizontal or horizontal position, and then they would start to create the supination of the left forearm, which helps the club fall behind them. Like I say, there are different variances on the tour. But one of the things that we see with the golfers that are able to hit the ball, you know, so straight but also so far, is that they keep the club face incredibly stable by continuing this rotation and just trying to keep this relationship as best as they can. The other option that you have in the golf swing is that, you know, regardless as to which sort of release maybe you go for, is how much that your arms work around your body. Now, what we generally see is that golfers that hold on to a drive-hold relationship will generally move the arms more around towards the left of their body. So you can see the way it really encourages me to rotate so I can hold on to this relationship here. Now, you can release your arms further away from your body. So you can see the way I'd start to work more this way. But generally speaking, what we tend to see is the golfers who operate more this way are normally the golfers that tend to create this sort of rolling, early supinatory motion here, okay? Which is why golfers normally don't like the look of this. When I say golfers, I suppose better golfers don't like the look of this because they know they're vulnerable maybe of getting too much curvature on the ball. Some golfers that swing over the top might find this position quite desirable, but I'd be careful of it. I'd be really careful, regardless as to what level of golfer you are. I think even if you're a slicer, I'd be careful of really working very much in this fashion, because eventually you'll just turn it maybe into too much of a hooky sort of motion. So the question would be then, how are you going to start working on your drive-hold relationship if you feel like you're somebody who's flippy? Well, in all honesty, this is why I talk a lot about on the channel about the rotation. You'd have to improve your rotational movement. So if you're somebody who's quite slidey, then you're going to get stuck and you're going to get flippy. So it's important that you go back to some of the earlier content and you understand the transition of the lower body, so the hips going more into what's known as an anterior tilt, transferring sequencing correctly, understanding the pre-impact position so you've got the best chance of keeping the club face stable, and then all of a sudden if you can put those pieces together as you continue to turn, then you've got the chance to be able to hold on to this drive hold position, which is going to give you the best chance of keeping the club face stable, which is something that we see most professionals operate within now. And normally the most professionals who are the most consistent on the tour are doing this sort of drive hold position, which is why it's so desirable. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. What I will do over the upcoming kind of few days is start to put some drills and exercises to help you encourage a feeling of a drive hold. But today I just wanted to talk about the general premise as to what you need to do, that you understand that the premise of a drive hold is going to be really very much about your rotation, which is one of the things that I'm a massive advocate of on the channel. And like I mentioned earlier, I'd really rewatch some of those if you're somebody who's struggling with an early hip extension, because you're never going to be able to have this desirable outcome. What's absolutely free is to press that subscribe button. It's also absolutely free. Press that little bell icon as well. That means you'll receive notifications every time a new video comes out. Send swings into the channel. Loads of people taking the opportunity to do this now. The links are in the description below to the social media platforms. Absolutely free to do it. Basically, I have a look at the videos and then on a weekly basis, I annotate over the videos so that we can all learn together, which I think is a really useful tool and people are really enjoying. So it's free to join in on that little party as well. And for today, that's pretty much it. Always appreciate a thumbs up, and I'll catch up with you in a couple of days.